Today's daf is daf lamed beis. It's actually not a full daf, it's only an omid. And then we make a sir. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan on the top of the omid, when a person is ready to read the Torah, and now the Torah is completely rolled, so he has to unroll it in order to read the Torah. Poseach, he should open it, v'roeh, and he should see exactly where they're going to read the Torah. And now the Sefer Torah is open. Is it the right moment to make the bracha? The Brisa says no. Golel, first he should close it again, roll it together, and then a mavar. And then choser poseach, now he's ready to open it and read the Torah. So in effect, this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. It comes out that you will open the Sefer in order to see where you're going to read from, close the Sefer in order to make the bracha, and then reopen the Sefer in order to read from the Sefer Torah. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Poseach v'roeh u'mevarech v'koreh. There's no need to close the Sefer Torah for the bracha. Simply recite the bracha as the Sefer Torah is open, and then read from it. My time with Rabbi Meir, why does Rabbi Meir insist that we close the Sefer when we make the bracha? Kidu Ula. And the Gemara is making a parallel to Ula. In other words, the Gemara is assuming an analogy between the case of the bracha and the case of the metargem, as we'll soon see. The Omar Ula, Mipnei Ma Omru, HaKorei BaTorah Lo Yisayeh LaMeturgaman. In those days, they would translate each verse of the Torah into the vernacular. And Ula rules that the Bal Koreh who's reading from the Sefer is not allowed to add any targum. Why? Kadesh lo yomru targum kosuv batorah. We're afraid that the onlooker would mistakenly think that what the Bal Koreh is reading, he's not reading it by heart, he's not translating, he's reading it from the Sefer. And we're not allowed to add anything to a Sefer Torah. We're not allowed to add targum, we're not allowed to add brachos. Sefer Torah has to be purely the words, the letters of the Torah. Now, once we have Ula, and Ula is concerned with the fact that the spectator, the onlooker, might mistakenly think that there's something written in the Sefer Torah, Sochanami, now we can apply this to Rabbi Meir when he's discussing the bracha, that the Sefer Torah should be closed when he recites the bracha, Kadesh lo yomer, because if it's open and he recites the bracha, they may come to the mistaken conclusion that brachos ksuvim b'Torah, that the brachos are written in the Torah itself. Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't Rabbi Yehuda realize that in the case of Targum, we have to be very careful, as Ula said it, and make sure that the Bal Koreh doesn't add anything to the Targum? Then why is Rabbi Yehuda lenient with regard to the brachos? The same logic that applies to Targum, meaning we should be afraid that maybe they'll think the Targum is written in the Sefer Torah, should apply to brachos as well. So more answers to defend Rabbi Yehuda, Targum ika l'mitei, brachos leka l'mitei. In the case of Targum, people might really think that the Targum is written in the Torah. After all, it's a translation into Aramaic of the Pesukim of the Torah. It makes sense that it might be written in the Torah. In fact, the commentaries point out that there are words in the Torah that are written in Aramaic, in Lashon Targum, like Yigar Sadusa, other examples perhaps. But in the case of brachas, who's going to make a mistake and think that they wrote the brachas in the Sefer Torah? Rabbi Yehuda thinks that there's nothing to worry about. I mean, everybody knows that the brachas are brachas. You know, you buy yourself a book of brachas, so you have a sitter and they write the brachas. The brachas are not written, inscribed in the Sefer Torah. So that's not even a havamina that we should be afraid of that. But to integrate the Targum into the Torah, that would make sense, and that's what we want to avoid, that loophole and that mistake where people might make. Omar Abzera, Omar Mas, halacha poseach v'roeh u'mevarech v'koreh. Halacha, we're going to pass like Rabbi Yehuda, that you don't have to close the Sefer Torah. You can open it, look at the pasuk that you're going to read from, and then go ahead and make the bracha. Nobody's going to think that the brachas are written inscribed in the Sefer Torah. Why did Rab Zera sideswipe Rab Yehuda and reiterate the halacha that we just had in the name of Rab Yehuda? He should have just simply said, we paskin like Rab Yehuda. And the Gemara answers, Mishum de Afcheluhu, that there's another girsa, and according to the other girsa, Dafka Rabbi Meir is the one who allows you to recite the brachos with the Sefer Torah open, and it's Dafka Rabbi Yehuda who prohibits it. So if he would have said Allah Rabbi Yehuda, would have implied, if he had that girsa, that we're being machmir, when in fact we're being making. Now, what does it mean when it says poseach v'roeh u'mevarich? Is that something that's mandatory, or he has that option? If he wants to, he can close the Sefer Torah and recite the brachas, but he has another option that he can leave it open. So this is a diyun in the poskim. My father, Zechon Levrach, was very makbid to keep the Sefer Torah open when he made the brachas, but for an entirely different reason. And that is just in case, and this happens quite frequently, it's common that the Baal Koreh will point to the wrong place. And the halacha is that if you make the bracha and all you have is a closed Sefer Torah, and your bracha is chal on that wrong place, which means you're going to have to recite the brachas a second time. But if on the other hand, the Sefer Torah is open, then when you make the bracha, you have in mind this whole section. It's like 3 gilyonos, and therefore you don't have that problem. Oh, Rabbi Zera, oh, Rav Masne, haluchos v'adbimos ein bohem kedusha. So there are certain parts of the Beis HaKnesses that do not have kedusha, and these are the luchos and the bimos. Now, we might think that the word bima means a place in which they put the Sefer Torah, they lie it down, and they open it, and they read from that. No. That's not the bima that we're talking about here. The bima that we're talking about here is the bima which the Melech, the king of Israel, would use once in every 7 years at Hakel. And they gathered together the people for a public reading of the Torah. The king read from the Torah. And there was a platform on which he would stand. It would elevate him. So that's not Kadosh B'Kedushas Beis HaKnesset. And what is Luchos? What is Luchos? So the Rashi says, it's a little bit unclear, but Rashi says that Luchos were book boards. In other words, when they bound together books, they had these boards that they used to use, and the books were sort of like, what do you say?
Crushed together?
Maybe they were crushed together. I'll read to you the English. He says the boards were used to cover sacred books. I guess you'd call it like book covers, that there's a whole bookbinding, fach, how do you say, profession. But the Rashba says that these boards that Rashi has in mind, since they cover the Torah scrolls, they have Kedusha, and it doesn't make any sense. And therefore, we have to look for another shot in what these boards are. The Ravid says that these boards are elevations. So we had an elevation before for the Melech. Now we have an elevation for the Matargim, the one who translates the Torah. It's kind of like a stool, that you climb up on a stool. Rav Shvatia. Now, we're going to have a whole string of the following transmission. Rav Shvatia in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Agolel Sefer Torah. So when you fold the Sefer Torah together, roll it together, Tzorchi Yama Yamitenu Al Tefer Al Bar. You know that when you have gilyonos, then there are seams that attach one gillion of the Sefer Torah to another. And when he folds the Sefer Torah, the part that should be in the middle is the seam. And that's where he tightens the Sefer Torah till he reaches the seam, because then if Chas v'Sholem, the seam tears, then it's in the middle of of the section between one Gillion and another Gillion. So it'll be relatively it'll be damage control. Another statement: Omer Rav Shvatya, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Hagolel Sefer Torah. So he's trying to find the place. Like this is something that happens commonly, especially on a Shabbos or a Yontif, Chanukah, Purim, this kind of thing, where there's a special Kriya. And there's only one Sefer Torah, so they have to roll the Sefer Torah in order to find that specific Gilyon where that Kriya is. So Rabbi Yochanan says you have to be very careful. And you should be makpid, golo mi bachutz, v'ein golo mi b'fnim. Let's say, for example, imagine we usually have two people doing this at the same time. We have one person here, and the other person is on the other side, right? He's called mi bachutz, because I'm really rolling the Sefer Torah towards myself, so I'm called mi b'fnim. I'm on the inside, and he's on the outside. And what should be done is golo mi bachutz. He should roll it from the outside, not from the inside. Because if you roll it from the inside, then it puts a lot more pressure on the Sefer Torah. He writes here, he wishes to roll the Sefer Torah from one passage to another, and the scroll is rolled up into two rolls. He places the scroll on his lap. I don't know exactly why he has to put it on his lap, but anyway. And then one of these two rolls is up against his body. That's going to be called mi b'fnim. The other is away from his body. He should position the scroll so that when he rolls it, he will be rolling and pulling the outer roll in order to get to the next section, the next Gillion in the Sefer Torah. So the inner roll is basically passive. He's holding on to it. The outer roll is pulling and releasing the part. In the inner roll, it's just releasing the parchment, and the pull is coming from the outer roll. If he would roll the scroll the other way around, by rolling and pulling the inner roll, there would be a danger of the outer roll unraveling, and it might fall. Then this is especially true if he's doing it on his lap. However, Kshumahadko, the Gemara says, when he tightens the scroll, notice he's not looking for another Gillion, but rather he wants to tightly close the Sefer Torah and bring the two rolls together. Then it's the exact opposite. Mahadko mi b'fnim, v'eino mahadko mi b'chutz. He should be rolling it forwards from the inner one. So now he's just trying to roll the Sefer Torah together and tightly together. If he were to roll the outer roll towards the inner roll, he would reach open to the open Sefer Torah. And that's not considered like the most kavod, the most honor and respect to the Sefer. Vaita, the Omer of Shvatya, Omer Rabbi Yochanan Asar Shekar b'Torah. That's the minimum amount that we require for Kriyas HaTorah. Agadol shebahem golel Sefer Torah. The greatest one of them, like the biggest scholar, he should be given Galila to roll the Sefer Torah. And the Mishnah Berurah says in our day, we shifted the kavod, the greatest kavod, to the Magbiya, the one who lifts the Sefer Torah, chose the Sefer Torah to the public. But at the time of the Gemara, the greatest honor was awarded to the person who rolls the Sefer. He gets the Rolls Royce. Hagolo notel schar kulo. We called up 7 people to the Torah on Shabbos, so 3 people on Monday or Thursday, and the one who gets the greatest schar is the one who does the glila, who rolls up the Sefer. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Levi, Asar Shekar b'Torah, Gol Sefer Torah, Kivol schar kula. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Schar kulam salka daitach? Could it be? I mean, very nice that he's, rolling up the Sefer Torah, but therefore he gets the schar of all the other people who read from the Sefer Torah. Gemara says, he gets an equal role, an equal reward, and his reward is a great reward. And it's equal to all of the other participants. So again, in the original formulation, it said, Kibel schar kula, implying that they don't get schar, he gets their schar. And in the second formulation, he gets a schar that's equal to their schar, but he's not taking away that schar. Furthermore, Omer of Shfati, Omer of Yochanan, Minayin, Chemishtamshim, Bebasko. How do we know that if we have choices and decisions to be made in life, and a heavenly voice comes out and gives us direction that we should rely on the Baskol, Shenemar? And now he quotes a pasuk in Yeshayahu with regard to the Yemos HaMashiach, and it says there, V'oznecha tishmana davar me'acharecha lemar. So I'll read to you the English translation of this pasuk. And your ears will hear some matter from behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. So where's this voice coming from? That's telling you this is the way you want to go, this is direction, and that's where you should walk. That's coming from a heavenly voice, right? A baska. By the way, it's interesting that it's called a baska, which literally means the daughter of a kol. The word baskol really means an echo. We don't hear the direct sound of the voice from Hashem. But what happens is, let's say a malach will come, an angel, and will transmit that voice from the heavens to us. So that's called a baskol, the next generation, so to speak. Bahani mili. When do we rely on a baskol? It's got to be an unusual voice. If it's a regular voice that you could attribute to a human being, then it doesn't have any special status to give you guidance and make a decision in life. So what makes it unique? How do I know it's different and I can identify it as a baskol? The shama kol gavra b'masa, the kol isisa b'davra. So let me try to start back. The last part is easier than the first. Kol issa b'davra, a woman generally doesn't go out into the fields. It's too dangerous. Might also be tznius issues out in the field. So if you're out in the field, that's called a davra, and you hear a woman's voice, and there's no one around, and there shouldn't be a woman there, then it's a heavenly voice. The more difficult part is kol gavra b'masa. You heard a male voice in the village. What's unusual about that? I mean, after all, that's where you can expect and anticipate to hear a male voice. How do you know that it's a baskol? Just because you didn't see him, maybe he's a ventriloquist, or maybe he made a noise and then he packed out. So that I can't explain. Now, what do you hear from the baskol? Hu di Omar, baskol says one or two things, either heim, or hu di Omar, lav, meaning yes, you're going on the right path, or no, you have to choose another path. He says here, the name of Marsha, the double affirmative or negative indicates a guarantee that the advice is being offered by the voice, and it's true advice. That's why he hears it twice. And the Mefarshim say that below ne'ima means without the trap, is Vishona below Zimmer. Or in the old days, they used to sing the Mishnayos, they had a special niggin with cantillations, with, trap. And he decides, he's not going to read the Mishnah in that way. is Olam on such a person, Karkosav Omer, the Pasuk in Yechezkel describes him as Vagam Ani Nasati Lohem Chukim Lo Tovim. And this nevuah of Yechezkel is Hashem's response to Israel's sins, whether it be idol worship or in general lack of Torah observance, which is enumerated earlier in that same chapter in Perek Chaf of Yechezkel. And the Gemara interprets this verse homiletically, and it's a continuation of listing of Israel's sins. In addition to the sins that are explicitly mentioned in the list earlier in that chapter, they also turn the decrees given by God into decrees which are not good. And how do they do so? By leaving out the cantillation. You're applying this very heavy pasuk, right? And you're concluding that he should be described as someone who's really not good. And aren't you overdoing it? Maybe he's just not good at truck. I mean, we have 3 boys, and amongst the boys, one of them is excellent, one of them is mediocre, and the third one can't get truck at all. Like I can't get truck at all. So just because he wasn't able to project his voice with the truck is therefore mishpatim. Now's the end of that pasuk in Yechezkel. It says mishpatim lo yichyu bahem. Ordinances, and they will not live by these ordinances. Bahem krinan. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. This is not a severe violation that he should be described as they will not live. We're talking about 2 scholars that live in one city. They don't have a chocolate back and forth in halacha. That's not a good thing. That's where we apply this pasuk in Yechezkel. Lahem chukim lo tovim u'mishpatim lo yichyu bahem. And he writes here in the footnote, quoting the Ran and the Marsha, that the intensive discussion of Torah matters is essential to arrive at the truth. And the Gemara Bracha says Torah can only be acquired in a group. It's a group learning. Therefore, the 2 Torah scholars who cannot discuss Torah matters agreeably will ultimately err in their interpretations. Amar Rav Parnach, Amar Rav Yochanan, a different Talmud of Rav Yochanan, Kala Oches Sefer Torah Arum. Arum means he doesn't have anything separating his hands from the Sefer Torah. He's grabbing onto the parchment with bare hands. Nikbar Arum. He'll be buried without tachrichim. Arum Salkedaitach? We're going to bury someone without tachrichim? Come on, that can't be. Elaema Nikbar Arum below mitzvahs. He's going to be buried naked without any mitzvahs. Once again, the Gemara says below mitzvahs Salkedaitach. Okay, he shouldn't have touched the parchment, but therefore he's going to be buried without any mitzvahs. He's been doing mitzvahs for his whole life. Nikbar Arum below Osa mitzvah. In other words, he's now involved in one particular mitzvah, and he grabs onto the Sefer Torah. He's going to be buried without that mitzvah. He's going to forfeit that mitzvah because simultaneous with his mitzvah, he was doing this bad thing. And he was Oches Sefer Torah Arum. So, for example, if he was reading the Sefer Torah at that time, and he touched it Arum, he's not going to get any reward for learning Torah. Well, let's say he grabbed the scroll to roll it closed, which is the mitzvah of Galila. He doesn't receive any reward for the mitzvah of Galila if he rolled it without a hefsek. Rav Yanai Bereid Rav Yanai Saba Mishmeid Rav Yanai Rab Mutav Tigolel Hamitpachas V'al Yigolel Sefer Torah. So now we're talking about, they used to have a cloth and they wrapped the Sefer Torah in a cloth. This way you would avoid touching the Sefer Torah directly. And what Kavod HaSefer requires that you take this cloth and wrap the Sefer Torah in this cloth. But Al Yigolel Sefer Torah. But you don't put down the Sefer Torah on top of the cloth and then start rolling the Sefer Torah in a way that it'll pick up the cloth. That's not the ideal Kavod HaTorah. He says the Torah should remain stationary, and we wrap the cloth around the Torah. But to put the Torah down, the cloth down, and then roll the Sefer Torah until it's covered by the wrapping, that's disrespectful of the Torah. Okay, Rabbi, you ready for this? Yeah. Okay. Vaydaber Moshe es Moadei Hashem Bnei Yisrael. Right, this is a pasuk in Parshas Emor, and it's quoted here in our Mishnah. And the Mishnah says, "Mitzvasam shu korin osan kol echad v'echad bizmana." From this pasuk of Moadei Hashem, we derive that we should be reading from the Torah on every yontif a section in the Torah that's appropriate for that period of time, for that yontif. Tan Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, Moshe tiken al Yisrael shiu sholim v'darshim binyono shel yom. Moshe established an enactment, a takana, that there should be a question and answer period in which the Chacham presents the halachas that are going to be relevant in the upcoming Moed, and the people will ask questions, and they'll get their answers. Hilchas Pesach v'Pesach, Hilchas Atzeres Atzeres, Hilchas Chag v'Chag. Hadron Alecha b'nei ha'ir uslikale Masechet Megilla. And now we're going to start in Mitzvah Hashem a new Masechet.